Welcome to part 2 of Foster Care and Adoption in Kentucky. I'm Dr. Wanda Jean Jones, and I'm so glad you've chosen to continue this journey with us. If you completed part 1, then you already have a strong understanding of how trauma, legal systems, and federal mandates intersect in the lives of children who've been placed in out-of-home care. But our work isn't done there. Because the truth is, systems don't raise children. People do. This second part of the training will take us deeper into the day-to-day realities of foster care and adoption in Kentucky and the families, professionals, and programs that hold it all together. We'll look more closely at the roles and responsibilities of caregivers, including what it takes to become a foster or adoptive parent and how relatives play a vital role in keeping children connected to family. We'll walk through the different types of adoption, explain the approval and matching process, and share details about support services that help adoptive families succeed, not just at the moment of adoption, but in the years that follow. And even if you don't see yourself becoming a foster or adoptive parent, this content matters for you. Whether you're an educator, a caseworker, a coach, a faith leader, or a community advocate, you are likely interacting with children who are part of these systems. Understanding how foster care and adoption really work allows you to serve those children with more empathy, more patience, and more impact. In this section, you'll also hear more directly about the Kentucky-specific processes, how the Department for Community-Based Services is structured, how cases move through the system, and what kinds of homes are needed most. If you've ever wondered why some placements fall through, why kinship care has grown in recent years, or how adoption subsidies work, this is where we'll dig in. This is a course rooted in hope, because the ultimate goal of foster care is not just temporary safety, it's permanency and healing. Adoption, when done with care and respect, can provide a lifetime of love and stability for a child who has experienced uncertainty for far too long. We'll also talk candidly about the challenges, because this work is never easy. There are hurdles, delays, mismatches, and systems that don't always work the way they're supposed to. But through every challenge, there's also the opportunity to make a difference, to change the trajectory of a child's life. So, whether you're here to learn more, to support others, or to prepare for a next step in your own caregiving journey, I want to thank you for showing up, for being someone who cares enough to understand the process behind the headlines, and for taking one more step toward being the kind of adult every child deserves. Let's walk through this together. Here's what we'll cover in today's course. We've organized this training into 4 major sections, each building on the next to give you a complete view of Kentucky's foster care and adoption system. We'll begin by revisiting the DCBS mission and the legal framework that guides child welfare work in our state. Even if you completed Part 1, this section is worth reviewing because we'll highlight how federal and state mandates shape the specific actions taken here in Kentucky. Understanding that legal foundation helps us make sense of everything else, especially when decisions seem confusing or complex. Next, we'll take a deeper dive into the foster care system itself. You'll learn more about why children are removed from their homes, the effects of trauma on development, and the types of placements used in our state. We'll also talk about foster home availability, sibling placements, and how trauma-informed care principles apply to children in your classroom or community space. Then we'll move into a practical section on caregiver options. This part is especially helpful if you're supporting families who may be considering fostering, or if you're just curious about how someone becomes a foster parent. We'll explain the approval process, licensing, required training, and the rise of kinship and fictive kin placements, which allow children to remain with relatives or trusted adults instead of strangers. You'll also learn how those caregivers are supported. Finally, we'll explore the full spectrum of adoption pathways. That includes private adoption, foster to adopt, relative adoption, and even adoption after termination of parental rights. We'll look at the legal process, the role of case managers, how adoptive families are matched with children, and the financial supports that help them thrive. Each section is designed to build both your knowledge and your compassion. And as always, we'll stay grounded in real-world context because nothing in this system happens in a vacuum. These are human stories shaped by real emotions, real challenges, and real hope. You'll also see discussion prompts built into the course. These are opportunities to pause, reflect, and connect your learning to your own experience, whether that's in a classroom, in your family, or in your broader community. So now that we've got our roadmap, let's get started with the first topic: how DCBS is structured and what its mission means for the children and families it serves.
Let's begin our content journey with the Department for Community-Based Services, or DCBS, the primary agency in Kentucky that oversees child welfare, including both foster care and adoption. The mission of DCBS is simple but powerful: to protect children from abuse and neglect. But protection doesn't happen in isolation. DCBS works through a broad network of collaborative partnerships to ensure children and families are supported from multiple angles. That means partnering with families and relatives, those who know the child best and can often provide the most stable placements. Caregivers, this includes licensed foster parents, kinship and fictive kin caregivers, and adoptive parents. Community partners like schools, medical professionals, churches, and social service organizations. And of course, the court system, which plays a legal oversight role in every child welfare case. Each of these partners brings something essential to the table. And when they're working together, sharing information, upholding plans, and centering the child's needs, we see better outcomes across the board. Now, one thing I want to emphasize here is that foster care is meant to be temporary. It is not designed to be a permanent solution. It's a bridge, a safety net, while longer-term plans are developed. In fact, statistics show that about 75% of children in foster care are eventually reunited with their birth families or placed with relatives. That's an important reminder that in most cases, the goal is not to replace the child's original family, it's to strengthen it. The mission of DCBS is rooted in the core federal outcomes we discussed in Part 1: safety, permanency, and well-being. Everything this agency does, from investigating reports to providing support services to managing transitions, is aimed at achieving those three things. And yes, it's complex, but it's also guided by law, driven by data, and fueled by people who care deeply about children. As an early care or education professional, you're part of this ecosystem. You might be one of the first reporters when you notice concerns. You might be a key support for a foster parent who's learning how to navigate trauma-informed care. Or you might be a stabilizing force for a child who is otherwise experiencing a lot of chaos. No matter your role, you can help bring the DCBS mission to life by focusing on what matters most: building trust, providing consistency, and keeping the child's long-term needs at the center of your work.
Let's now take a closer look at one of the most influential laws in child welfare, the Adoption and Safe Families Act, commonly known as ASFA. ASFA was passed in 1997, and it represented a significant shift in how the child welfare system approached permanency. Before ASFA, it was not uncommon for children to linger in foster care for years, moving from home to home without a clear plan for adoption or reunification. This instability often caused long-term emotional harm, academic delays, and difficulty forming secure attachments. ASFA sought to change that. The law emphasizes that a child's safety and need for permanency must take priority over indefinite efforts to rehabilitate birth parents, especially when progress isn't being made. It provides states with clear timelines for action to ensure that children are not growing up in limbo. Let's walk through the two key provisions outlined here. First, termination of parental rights, or TPR. Under ASFA, states must begin proceedings to terminate parental rights if a child has been in foster care for 15 out of the most recent 22 months, unless there's a compelling reason not to, such as a relative placement, or a documented plan for reunification that is actively progressing. Why 15 months? Because time matters to children. A toddler doesn't understand that their parent is working through a court process. They only know whether or not they have a consistent caregiver, a stable home, and someone they trust to tuck them in at night. The second provision focuses on adoption after TPR. Once parental rights have been terminated, ASFA encourages states to move swiftly towards adoption, rather than letting children drift in temporary care. This is critical for giving children a true sense of belonging, identity, and legal permanence. Now, it's important to say, these decisions are never easy. Termination of parental rights is a serious and final legal action. It severs the legal bond between child and parent. Courts do not take it lightly, and agencies must demonstrate clear, ongoing concerns about the parent's ability to safely reunify. But ASFA was created to protect children from endless cycles of uncertainty. It's based on the idea that every child deserves a safe, permanent, and loving home within a developmentally appropriate timeframe. As someone who works with children and families, you may not be directly involved in court proceedings, but you can support the healing that happens afterward. Children who are moving toward adoption may still carry complex grief, fear, or loyalty to birth family. They need understanding, not judgment. Patience, not pressure. Adoption is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of a new one. And with the right supports in place, it can be a powerful, life-changing turning point for a child who has waited far too long for stability.
Next, let's talk about one of the most family-centered pieces of legislation in the child welfare system, the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act of 2008. It's a long name, but its purpose is simple: to keep children connected to their families and communities whenever possible. Research and lived experience show that children do better when they are placed with people they already know and trust. That might be a grandparent, an aunt or uncle, an older sibling, or a close family friend. These relationships can provide continuity, comfort, and a sense of identity in a time that feels incredibly uncertain. This act emphasizes relative placement as a preferred first option. But it's not just a suggestion, it's a legal requirement. Here's what it means in practice. First, child welfare workers must prioritize identifying appropriate relatives for placement as soon as a child enters care. That means we don't just default to foster care with strangers. We ask, who already knows this child? Who can step in, even temporarily? Second, the agency must exercise what's called due diligence in notifying relatives that a child has been removed from the home. That includes all adult grandparents, as well as other adult relatives of the child. This must happen within 30 days of removal. Why? Because time is critical. The sooner a child is placed with a familiar adult, the fewer disruptions they're likely to experience. Fewer transitions mean more stability, and ultimately better outcomes in school, behavior, and long-term well-being. And third, this act encourages states to support these relative placements with services, training, and when needed, financial assistance. It recognizes that kinship care is not always easy. A grandparent may be living on a fixed income. An aunt may not have parenting experience, but if we provide the right support, these placements can be powerful tools for healing. I've met many caregivers who stepped in when no one else could, who rearranged their lives to raise a child they love. And I've seen the difference it makes when that child doesn't have to call a stranger mom or dad on day one. When they can stay in the same school, eat familiar meals, hear the same family stories. That's connection. That's resilience. As early childhood professionals, we often work directly with children in kinship placements. Be mindful that these caregivers may need extra help navigating systems, paperwork, or trauma responses. Approach them with the same respect and encouragement you would offer a licensed foster parent, because they're doing life-changing work. The Fostering Connections Act reminds us that we are not just caring for children, we're preserving families. And every connection we can protect is one less loss a child has to endure.
Now, let's turn to a critical question at the heart of this training. Why do children enter foster care? There is a common misconception that it's always about dramatic, visible abuse. But the truth is, the reasons are often more complex, more hidden, and more connected to poverty, untreated trauma, and systemic barriers. Let's begin with the most common reason: neglect. Neglect isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's a result of parents who are overwhelmed, unsupported, or dealing with mental health or substance use challenges. But regardless of intent, neglect places a child at risk, and the system has a responsibility to intervene. Neglect can take many forms. Physical neglect, not providing food, shelter, or clean clothing. Educational neglect, failing to enroll a child in school or follow through on special education plans. Medical neglect, not obtaining needed treatment for illness or injury. And emotional neglect, where a child's need for affection, attention, and emotional security is not being met. Next, we have abuse, which may be physical, sexual, emotional, or psychological. Abuse is typically more acute and immediate in its danger, and reports of abuse often trigger emergency removals. These are heartbreaking cases, and they require immediate protective action. The third category is dependency. This refers to children who are not being actively harmed, but who are without proper care through no fault of the parent or guardian. For example, a child whose only parent is incarcerated. A child whose caregiver has died unexpectedly. A child whose parent is hospitalized long-term or is struggling with a severe disability. In these cases, the child's need for support is just as urgent, but the intervention may look different. The focus is often on identifying safe relatives or guardians who can step in quickly. And finally, we must address a growing concern: human trafficking. Yes, even in our own communities, children are being exploited, whether through sex trafficking, labor trafficking, or domestic servitude. When child protective services become aware of these situations, the response must be swift, trauma-informed, and sensitive to the unique risks involved. Understanding why children enter care matters because it influences how we support them once they're here. A child who is neglected may need reassurance and consistency. A child who is abused may need therapeutic support and protective space. A child from a dependency situation may need grief counseling and stable guardianship. A child recovering from trafficking will need safety, trust building, and intensive trauma-informed care. These experiences shape how children behave, how they bond, how they learn, and how they heal. And they also shape how we as professionals approach their care. So I encourage you, whenever you're working with a child in foster care, don't just ask what's wrong with them. Ask what happened to them, and then ask, how can I be part of their healing? Let's take a moment to focus on a law that speaks directly to some of the most vulnerable youth in our care, those who are at risk of or have already experienced trafficking. This is the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act, passed in 2015. This law acknowledges a hard truth. Foster youth are at significantly higher risk for exploitation, especially if they've experienced multiple placements, trauma, or unstable relationships with caregivers. Children who feel disconnected, unseen, or unprotected are far more likely to be targeted by predators who promise safety, affection, or opportunity. This legislation tackles the issue in two critical ways. First, it promotes normalcy. That means making sure foster youth have access to the same everyday experiences that their peers enjoy: sports teams, sleepovers, after-school jobs, dances, summer camps. These aren't luxuries, they're developmental necessities. When youth are excluded from these opportunities, they feel different, isolated, and overlooked. That's the very vulnerability traffickers prey upon. Second, the law directs child welfare agencies to actively prevent trafficking, not just respond to it. It outlines several specific responsibilities that must be upheld. Runaway and missing youth must be reported within 24 hours. Every hour matters when a young person is unaccounted for. If a child is suspected to be a victim of sex trafficking, it must be reported to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. States must develop and provide specialized services for youth who have been trafficked. These services include trauma-informed therapy, housing support, education access, and legal assistance. This law reframes how we see these children. Instead of asking, why is she acting out? We ask, what is she protecting herself from? Instead of labeling them as runners, we look at the trauma behind the behavior. We stop punishing survival instincts and start providing pathways to healing. And the truth is, many of the signs of trafficking show up in our childcare and education spaces: unexplained absences, fearful behavior, sudden withdrawal, or inappropriate relationships. When we're informed and observant, we become the safety net these children need. The underlying message of this act is clear. All children deserve safety and dignity, not just from harm, but also through participation, connection, and normal childhood experiences. So, as professionals, we must ensure foster youth don't just survive. They deserve to belong, to explore, and to feel that their lives are worth investing in. The Family First Prevention Services Act, or FFPSA, passed in 2018, marks one of the most profound shifts in child welfare in decades. Rather than focusing only on what to do after a child has been removed, this law asks the critical question: what can we do to keep families together safely in the first place? That's what makes it so transformative. For many years, funding and services were tied almost exclusively to children already in foster care. Family First changes that. It allows states to use federal dollars to fund preventative services, programs that support families before a crisis leads to separation. Let's look at three key areas where this act increases access for families. 1. Mental health services. Family First supports evidence-based therapeutic interventions for parents and children alike. That might mean counseling for a parent dealing with unresolved trauma, or play therapy for a child struggling with emotional regulation. The focus is on building coping strategies and relational health, not just managing symptoms. 2. Substance use treatment. Substance use continues to be one of the leading causes of child removal nationwide. FFPSA supports programs that help parents treat addiction at its root, not just through detox, but with holistic care, therapy, relapse prevention, peer support, and in some cases, inpatient family-friendly treatment options. It recognizes that recovery is a journey, and that keeping families intact during that journey improves outcomes for both parent and child. 3. Parenting skills development. This includes classes, home visits, and coaching designed to help caregivers build routines, manage challenging behavior, and understand early childhood development. These programs are not about judgment. They're about equipping families with the tools they need to parent with confidence and consistency. One of the most powerful elements of Family First is its belief that family preservation is not just the ideal, it's achievable when we provide the right resources early enough. It's also worth noting that this law places strong limits on the use of group care or congregate settings. It requires states to justify non-family placements and to prioritize foster homes and kinship placements first. In short, this law encourages us to see the family as the client, not just the child. And it reminds us that child welfare systems function best when they operate from a place of prevention, partnership, and trust. If you're a professional supporting children and families, FFPSA empowers you to be part of that early intervention team. You can encourage a parent to accept help before things fall apart. You can connect families to community supports. You can notice the signs of stress and take action early. Because when we invest in keeping families whole, we don't just protect children, we change the entire trajectory of their lives. Let's talk about one of the most essential pillars in a child's journey through foster care: the caregivers. It's important to understand that there is not a one-size-fits-all model when it comes to who provides care for children in out-of-home placements. Children come with unique needs, histories, and personalities. And because of that, the system relies on a variety of caregiver types to ensure we match children to the best possible environments for their healing, safety, and growth. Let's walk through each of these categories. First, we have foster parents. These are licensed caregivers who open their homes to children in state custody. Foster parents can care for children short-term, while longer-term solutions like reunification or adoption are explored. They receive training and support to prepare for the realities of parenting children who may have experienced trauma, grief, or instability. Next, we have relatives and fictive kin. These are family member or close family friends, people who have an existing bond with the child. These caregivers might choose to get formally licensed, or they may be approved under kinship care guidelines. Placing a child with someone they know can ease the transition, reduce trauma, and maintain important cultural and familial connections. Then there's a category called child-specific caregivers. These individuals are approved specifically to care for a particular child. They may not be general foster parents, but they have a relationship or history with that child, perhaps a former teacher, a coach, or a godparent. These placements are often deeply meaningful and can offer continuity and stability. Respite providers play a very different but essential role. These are caregivers who provide short-term relief to foster or kinship parents. Sometimes primary caregivers need time to rest, manage emergencies, or attend to their own health. Respite care helps ensure they don't burn out, and that the child remains safe and supported in the process. We also have residential providers. These are structured group homes designed for children who may need more support than a family-based setting can offer. These placements often involve highly trained staff and are sometimes used for children with behavioral or developmental challenges. And finally, psychiatric care providers. These are specialized facilities for children who require intensive therapeutic treatment for serious mental health needs. While not ideal for long-term placement, they are a necessary part of the continuum of care for children in crisis. Each of these caregivers has a vital role. They're part of a much larger network of healing. They make it possible for children to have a place to sleep, a routine to count on, and a trusted adult to turn to, even during some of the hardest moments of their lives. And for you as someone supporting these children, it's helpful to know who's in the picture. Whether you're speaking to a grandparent raising a child with no support, or working with a foster parent navigating trauma-informed strategies, remember, compassion and information go hand in hand. When we understand who the caregivers are, we can better understand what the child needs.
Now let's talk about a concept that might sound simple, but it's one of the most powerful protective factors in foster care: normalcy. Normalcy is about giving children in foster care the chance to do the things that other children do: play soccer, attend sleepovers, have a birthday party, learn to drive, go on a field trip, join a club, or stay after school for tutoring. And for many youth in care, these experiences are not guaranteed. Historically, foster youth have faced layers of bureaucratic barriers, permission slips, caseworker sign offs, agency approvals, all for things their peers take for granted. These delays and restrictions can make foster youth feel like outsiders, like their lives are under constant scrutiny. That's why the reasonable and prudent parent standard was introduced in federal law. It gives foster parents the authority and the responsibility to make everyday decisions as any reasonable parent would. They don't need court permission to let a teenager attend a school dance or take a music class. They can use good judgment, assess the situation, and say yes, just like any other parent would. And here's why that matters so much. Normalcy is not a luxury, it's a necessity. It's foundational to building a child's self esteem, resilience, and sense of belonging. When children are excluded, they internalize shame. They think, I'm not like the other kids, or worse, I don't deserve the same things other kids have. But when they're included, when they participate, they begin to believe that they are just as worthy, just as capable, and just as loved. Foster parents play a critical role in this. They are the gatekeepers of normalcy. They are the ones who advocate for youth to be part of their communities, their schools, and their peer groups. So, whether you're working with a caregiver, an agency, or directly with a child, encourage these opportunities for normal life. They build memories, confidence, and healing. And if you're working in early childhood settings, look for ways to help young children in care engage fully in your program. Invite their caregivers to participate. Send home materials that make the child feel proud of what they've learned. Say their names with warmth. Notice their talents. Let them be kids. Because when foster youth are given space to just be children, they develop the skills and the spirit they need to thrive, even after hardship. And that is the heart of normalcy.
Let's take a deeper look at the Reasonable and Prudent Parent Standard, or RPPS, because it plays a major role in the daily lives of children in foster care. This standard was introduced to correct a long-standing problem in child welfare: children in care missing out on ordinary life experiences because caregivers didn't feel they had the authority to approve them. Prior to this law, something as simple as going on a class field trip, spending the night at a friend's house, or joining a school club often required layers of permission, sometimes delaying or even preventing participation. The result? Children already coping with trauma were being further isolated from their peers through no fault of their own. RPPS changes that. It gives foster parents the ability to make day-to-day decisions, just like a reasonable parent would. So what kinds of activities fall under this standard? First, we have extracurricular activities. That includes things like sports teams, school clubs, after-school programs, and field trips. Participation in these activities builds self-esteem, encourages teamwork, and helps children feel like they belong. Second, we have cultural activities like visiting museums, attending concerts, or participating in faith-based celebrations and heritage events. These experiences allow children to stay connected to their identity, their culture, and their sense of self, which is especially important for those placed in homes that may be culturally different from their own. And finally, there are social activities like sleepovers, birthday parties, or dances. These are often where children make memories and form bonds that help them feel normal. Foster children should not have to sit on the sidelines of life because of red tape. Now, the term reasonable and prudent means foster parents are still expected to consider the child's age, maturity, behavior, and safety. But it also recognizes that caregivers know the child best, and that we must trust their judgment to support developmentally appropriate decisions. When foster parents use RPPS properly, they're not just giving permission for an activity, they're sending a message. You deserve joy. You deserve friendship. You deserve to be included. In your role, whether in early education, case management, or support services, keep RPPS in mind. If you encounter a child who seems left out, ask whether there's something in the system that's creating a barrier. Help caregivers understand they have the legal authority and the emotional responsibility to let these kids be kids. Because in the long run, those moments of normalcy add up. They become part of the child's healing story. And they show that even within a system built on rules and regulations, we still prioritize heart, connection, and childhood. Becoming a foster parent is not a simple decision, and it's certainly not a simple process. That's intentional. We want to ensure that those who take on the role of foster caregiver are prepared, committed, and supported. Let's walk through the first part of the foster parent approval process, which lays the foundation for every future placement. We begin with the training curriculum. Every prospective foster parent must complete a series of educational modules. These are designed to help caregivers understand not only the logistical side of fostering, like paperwork and policy, but also the emotional side, trauma, grief, attachment, child development, and the cultural differences they may encounter. This training isn't about checking boxes. It's about building empathy, awareness, and confidence. It equips caregivers to step into a child's story with open eyes and a ready heart. Next, we have home visits. A trained social worker or private child placing agency representative will conduct several visits to the prospective caregiver's home. These visits help assess safety, family dynamics, and readiness to welcome a child. It's also an opportunity to ask questions and build a relationship with the licensing team. Then comes the documentation phase. Prospective caregivers must complete a detailed application, submit references, fill out questionnaires, and provide information about their finances, background, and family history. It's a thorough review, not just of their current situation, but of their capacity to weather the challenges that can come with fostering. And of course, there are background checks. These are mandatory and extensive. They include fingerprinting, checks against child abuse and neglect registries, criminal records, and sex offender databases. Safety is non-negotiable, and these screenings help ensure children are placed in secure environments. Some families are surprised by how in-depth this process is. But it's important to remember, we're not just placing a child in a home, we're placing them in a healing environment. That takes more than good intentions. It takes structure, vetting, training, and teamwork. As someone working in the field, your role may include helping caregivers navigate this approval journey. Offer encouragement. Help them gather documents. Reassure them when the process feels overwhelming. And celebrate the moment when they complete this first phase, because it's a milestone of commitment and care. Foster parenting isn't just about opening your home. It's about opening your heart, your routine, and your understanding to a child who may never have experienced consistent love before. And this process, these steps, are the beginning of that transformation. We just covered the first half of the foster parent approval process. Now, let's take a look at the final steps that complete a caregiver's journey toward becoming a licensed foster parent. First, we begin with the home environment. Safety is not just a checklist. It's a deep commitment to ensuring that every child who enters a home is walking into a space that is welcoming, clean, functional, and emotionally stable. During this part of the process, the agency will conduct home inspections to make sure that the physical space meets standards for child safety and well-being. They'll look at things like working smoke detectors, secured medications, appropriate sleeping arrangements, and general household conditions. But beyond the logistics, it's about the energy of the home. Does the space feel like it could belong to a child? Are there signs of warmth, organization, and routine? Next is health information. This applies to all household members, adults and children alike. Everyone will need to complete a basic health assessment, including a TB screening and verification that they are physically and emotionally able to provide care. This step ensures that no hidden health conditions pose a risk to the child or make caregiving unsustainable. Following that is the financial statement. This doesn't mean you need to be wealthy to foster, but the agency needs to see that you're financially stable enough to support your household without relying entirely on foster care stipends. That includes being able to cover rent, utilities, groceries, and basic needs, even if those checks are delayed or disrupted. The next item is verification documents. These may include marriage certificates, divorce decrees, death certificates for former partners, or other legal records that help establish the structure of the home. While it may seem like a formality, these documents help create an accurate picture of the household's history and support network. Now, I want to take a moment and acknowledge something. This process can feel overwhelming. The paperwork, the home inspections, the waiting, it can seem like a mountain. But remember this. Every child in care has experienced loss, change, and disruption. So it's our responsibility as a system to be sure that the people who step up to help them are ready. And that readiness is not about perfection. It's about preparation, commitment, and willingness to learn. On average, the approval process takes 4 to 6 months to complete. but that timeline can vary depending on how quickly the applicant moves through the requirements and the caseload of the agency. If you're working with potential foster parents, encourage them to stick with that. Help them see that the effort they're putting in now is paving the way for a child's new beginning.
Let's now turn our focus to kinship care, a deeply meaningful and growing part of the child welfare system. When children cannot remain safely with their parents, the first step is always to look within the child's family and close circle. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, godparents, family, friends, these are the people who already know the child. They already have a connection, a history, a story. And research is clear, children placed with relatives experience better outcomes. They tend to have fewer behavioral challenges, stronger cultural identity, more stable placement, and a greater chance of staying connected to their community, school, and support systems. Now, let's talk about the two main options for relatives or fictive kin. The first option is to seek approval as a foster parent. This path includes training and support, and it comes with financial assistance. It allows relatives to be part of the formal foster care system while still preserving that personal bond with the child. It also provides access to services, medical care, and educational supports. The second option is to pursue legal custody. This path may not involve foster care stipends, but it can still provide access to kinship care benefits, including support groups, some financial help, and service referrals. It offers more autonomy while still keeping the child with someone they trust. Now, either path requires a home assessment, usually conducted by a social service worker. This isn't to discourage relatives, it's to ensure the home is safe, the caregiver is capable, and that the child's well being is front and center. Sometimes relatives are hesitant. They may feel ashamed or fearful. They may believe they're too old, not financially ready, or overwhelmed by the emotional weight of stepping into a parental role. But with guidance, resources, and encouragement, many relatives find they're more prepared than they think. They just need someone to walk with them, to show them that their love matters and their presence is powerful. As early childhood professionals, it's important that we recognize kinship caregivers in our classrooms and communities. They may not always know the system, but they often bring deep love, wisdom, and lived experience. Treat them as partners. Offer flexibility. Honor their role. Because when a child is placed with someone who feels like home, someone who knows their middle name, their bedtime routine, or their favorite snack, that child begins to heal differently. Kinship care doesn't erase the trauma, but it surrounds it with something familiar, something steady. And for a child whose world has shifted overnight, that familiarity can be the very thing that gives them hope.
Let's talk about one of the most powerful and personal resources available to kinship caregivers in our state, KY-KINS. KY-KINS stands for Kentucky Kinship Information, Navigation, and Support. And what makes this program stand out is that it's not based on theory or policy, it's based on real-life experience. KY-KINS is a peer mentoring program. That means caregivers, people who've walked this journey themselves, are trained to become peer supporters. They're matched with kinship caregivers who are just starting out or who may be struggling to find balance, resources, or hope. The power of KY-KINS lies in relationship. It's not about a hotline or a pamphlet, it's about connection. Let's walk through how it works. The first step is personalized matching. When a kinship caregiver joins the program, they're matched with a peer supporter based on similarities, things like their family structure, background, caregiving goals, or current challenges. That personalized connection matters. It helps the caregiver feel seen, not just served. Next is virtual connection. We know that most caregivers are busy. Many are older. Some are raising grandchildren while still working full-time. KY-KINS meets them where they are. Connections can happen through video calls, phone conversations, or even text messages. There's flexibility. There's responsiveness. Then there's resource navigation. Peer supporters help kinship families find local and state-level resources that may not always be obvious. They'll guide families through things like food assistance, legal aid, parenting programs, mental health services, or even support groups. They don't just tell families where to go, they walk alongside them. And finally, peer supporters offer advocacy support. If a caregiver is having trouble understanding the system, or if they feel lost during a placement hearing or a case meeting, their KY-KINS partner can help. They may assist in preparing questions, communicating with social workers, or even clarifying policy language. One of the most important things to know about KY-KINS is that participation is voluntary. Caregivers can stay in the program as long as it serves them. There's no pressure, no judgment, just help. In my own experience, I've seen KY Kins change lives. Grandmothers who felt overwhelmed gained confidence. Aunts raising multiple children with no prior parenting experience found structure. Kin who were close to burnout got their second wind just from knowing they weren't alone. When you're working with kinship families, always mention KY Kins. Share the referral form. Explain what it is. Because sometimes what a caregiver needs most is not another checklist. It's a voice that says, I've been there. You've got this. On this next slide, we shift from how KY Kins works to why it matters, not just on paper, but in the hearts and homes of caregivers across Kentucky. Being a kinship caregiver is a unique kind of courage. Most often, these individuals never expected to raise a relative's child. Their role wasn't planned but chosen in a moment of crisis, a phone call, a knock at the door, a court order. And while love is there, the logistics can be overwhelming. Suddenly, grandparents are enrolling kids in school, managing trauma behaviors, and navigating systems they've never encountered before. KY Kins exists because formal services can't meet every need. A case manager might help with paperwork. A judge might make a placement. But what happens at 10 p.m.? When the child is crying and the caregiver is second-guessing everything? That's where a peer supporter can be a lifeline. On the right side of the slide, we see just a few examples of how KY Kins presents itself through its evolving branding. Black, blue, and gold logos that reflect the seriousness, clarity, and value of the support they provide. But what's even more powerful than the branding is the testimony of those who've benefited. You'll see a quote here. The peer support I received through KY Kins made all the difference. Having someone who truly understands what I'm going through has been invaluable. Kentucky Kinship Caregiver. Let's sit with that for a moment. Invaluable, not helpful, not nice, invaluable. Because that connection, a text message at the right time, a shared story of perseverance, a referral to a service they didn't know existed, can be the difference between burnout and resilience. This is why programs like KY Kins are not optional. They are essential. They remind us that behind every case number is a caregiver navigating unfamiliar terrain. They reinforce the truth that lived experience is its own form of expertise. And they model the kind of community-driven, culturally attuned, human-centered support we need more of. If you're designing trainings, working in early and high childhood programs, or collaborating with caregivers in your community, talk about KY Kins. Include them in your onboarding. Refer new caregivers directly. Invite peer supporters to speak. Because when we center relationships, we build something stronger than policy. We build trust.
Now we're moving into a topic that often brings a deep sense of hope and resolution for children and families alike: adoption. Adoption is not just a legal process, it's a lifelong commitment. It creates a permanent legal relationship between a child and their adoptive parent or parents, offering that child the chance to thrive in a safe, loving, and permanent home, often called a forever family. In Kentucky and in many other states, adoption becomes an option after all efforts at reunification have been exhausted. Remember, the primary goal of the child welfare system is always reunification with the child's biological family when it's safe and appropriate. But when that is no longer a viable option, adoption becomes the pathway to permanence. Let's take a moment to reflect on what adoption really offers to a child. Beyond paperwork and court hearings, it offers stability, security, and the chance to belong to a family, not just temporarily, but for life. We celebrate adoption because it restores a sense of normalcy, of being chosen, of having a place to grow and be loved. But we must also recognize that adoption can carry layers of complexity, grief, loss, and the ongoing impact of trauma. As professionals and caregivers, it's our responsibility to hold space for all of it. The next few slides will walk us through different types of adoption pathways available in Kentucky. Whether you're working directly with adoptive families or simply want to better understand the systems that support them, this section will help you speak knowledgeably and compassionately about the adoption journey. We'll also look at the approval process, the financial supports available to families who adopt through the state, and how adoption intersects with trauma, healing, and identity. This is an area where your understanding can make a big difference, not just in professional settings, but in how you affirm and support adoptive families every day. So let's begin by exploring the different types of adoption and what they mean for children, families, and our collective role in creating permanency.
There are several types of adoption pathways, each one governed by different policies, processes, and systems. Knowing the difference can help us support families with the right information and sensitivity. Let's start with public agency adoptions. This is what most people think of when they hear about foster care adoptions. These occur when children in state custody under the supervision of the cabinet are adopted, often by their foster parents. It's a process that begins with temporary care, but ultimately leads to permanence when reunification is not possible. Many foster families step into this role with open hearts, and with support from the cabinet, they become that forever family. Next, we have private agency adoptions. These adoptions happen through licensed child placing agencies that have custody of a child, often infants, and manage the full adoption process. These are typically planned adoptions involving adoptive parents who've gone through agency-specific screenings and training. These agencies often serve birth parents who voluntarily choose adoption. Then we have independent adoptions. These happen outside the involvement of the cabinet or a private agency. Often facilitated through attorneys, independent adoptions are more common in cases involving relatives, close family friends, or families who've made direct arrangements with a birth parent. While these can be quicker, they also require careful legal oversight to ensure everyone's rights are protected. And finally, foreign adoptions, sometimes called international adoptions. These involve adopting a child from another country. The cabinet's involvement here is minimal, as these adoptions are governed primarily by international law and immigration policy. Families pursuing international adoption must meet specific U.S. and foreign country requirements, which can be time-consuming and complex. No matter which path is taken, the destination is the same. A child is given the chance to heal, grow, and thrive with parents who've chosen to walk this journey with them. As providers and educators, we can help demystify these options for families and children. We can make space for their questions, respect their emotions, and remind them that the goal is not just adoption, it's belonging. Now, let's talk about a form of adoption that often stays under the radar, but is incredibly important in preserving a child's connections to family, culture, and identity: relative adoption. Relative adoptions happen when a biological relative of the child steps forward and says, "I will give this child a permanent home." This might be a grandparent, an aunt, an older sibling, or even a cousin, someone who has a familial bond and a desire to legally adopt the child. Now, while this path offers many emotional benefits, like familiarity, cultural continuity, and pre-existing relationships, it does come with unique legal and financial challenges. Here's the key thing to understand. Relative adoptions are typically handled privately. That means the relative must retain their own attorney, file their own adoption petition, and cover all court and legal fees. These adoptions are not eligible for state adoption subsidies, even though they serve the same permanent purpose. In some cases, the termination of parental rights, also known as TPR, must be completed before a relative can proceed with adoption. This can add another layer of complexity and cost, especially for families who are already under financial stress. So while relative adoption provides incredible value, offering children continuity of care and emotional security, it can sometimes be out of reach for those who can't afford the legal process. That's something we need to keep in mind when supporting kinship caregivers or relatives who express interest in adopting. Let's take a look at the data. Between 2019 and 2021, Kentucky received nearly 1,200 relative adoption petitions each year. That number dipped a bit in 2020, likely due to pandemic-related court delays, but the overall trend shows that many relatives are stepping up and doing what they can to give children permanency through adoption. This is where our role as educators, advocates, and professionals comes in. We can help ensure these families know their rights, understand the process, and are directed to trusted legal resources. Let's not forget, every time a relative adoption is finalized, it means a child doesn't have to grow up wondering if they belong. They know they do. Now, let's turn to another powerful path to permanency: foster parent adoption. This occurs when a foster parent, after caring for a child temporarily, makes the decision to adopt that child permanently. This is a big moment, both practically and emotionally. It marks the transition from temporary caregiver to forever family. And for many children, that kind of stability is life-changing. Let's break down the numbers. At the time of this data snapshot, 2,779 children in Kentucky had adoption as their stated permanency goal. That means reunification was no longer an option, and adoption was the next best step to provide long-term security. Of those children, 1,564 were legally free for adoption, meaning parental rights had already been terminated. And of those legally free children, 940 were on track to be adopted by their current foster parents. That's significant. It shows us that foster families aren't just temporary solutions, they're often permanent ones too. Now, what about financial support? The state offers up to $1,000 in non-recurring adoption costs to help with attorney fees, court costs, and other related expenses. While this support doesn't cover everything, it helps reduce the financial barrier for foster families who are ready to adopt. And of course, children adopted from foster care may continue to receive monthly adoption assistance depending on their needs, which can make a lasting difference for families caring for children with trauma histories, developmental delays, or special medical needs. Here's what I want you to remember. Behind every number is a child. A child who needed a safe home and found one. A child who may have come in scared, unsure, and carrying trauma, and found healing in the consistent care of a foster parent who became mom or dad. Our role is to support these families through the process, to educate them on what to expect, encourage them when the journey gets tough, and celebrate the moment permanency is achieved. Foster parent adoption is not just a legal outcome, it's a profound act of love. Once a foster family decides to adopt, the legal process begins, and it's important for us as educators, caregivers, and professionals to understand what that process looks like from start to finish. This isn't just paperwork, it's a journey through the court system that ends with a life-changing moment, a child gaining a permanent family. Let's walk through the 4 major steps in the foster parent adoption legal process. Step 1, preparation of court reports. This is where things start. Recruitment and certification staff, also known as R&C staff, prepare a formal court report and a consent to adoption document. These reports are not optional. They are required by law, and the cabinet must file them within 90 days of the adoption petition being submitted. The court report helps the judge understand the child's background, current situation, and the fitness of the adoptive parents. It must be thorough and honest, giving a complete picture of what's in the child's best interest. Step 2, guardian ad litem appointment. At the same time, the court assigns a guardian ad litem, or GAL. This is a licensed attorney who represents the child's best interest in court. The GL reviews the case independently, talks to the child if appropriate, and files their own report. In Kentucky and in most other states, the GL must complete their portion within the same 90-day window. So things move quickly here, and everyone involved has to stay on task. Step 3, adoption hearing. This is the big day, the formal hearing in front of a judge. The judge will review all submitted documents, ask questions, and evaluate whether the adoption is in the child's best interest. It's common for this to be a joyful moment. Often friends and extended family are invited to attend. Some courtrooms allow photos after the hearing, and it becomes a celebration. But let's not forget, this is still a legal process, and it must be approached with seriousness and accuracy. Step 4, final judgment. If everything is in order, the judge will issue a judgment of adoption. This legally finalizes the adoption, and from that moment forward, the child is permanently and irrevocably part of the adoptive family, with all the same legal rights as a biological child. Now, this whole process typically takes 3 to 6 months, depending on court scheduling, the responsiveness of the legal team, and how fast the documents are prepared. If you're supporting a foster family during this time, be patient, stay encouraging, and help them understand that legal permanence may take a little time, but it's worth every step. Let's talk about adoption subsidies, because financial support can make all the difference for families considering adoption, especially when they're adopting a child with special needs. Many children in foster care qualify as having special needs, not just in terms of medical diagnoses, but also because of their background, trauma history, age, or sibling status. And to support these children and the families who step up to adopt them, adoption subsidies are available. Here's what's typically included. Monthly maintenance payments. These are ongoing payments designed to help meet the daily needs of the child: clothing, food, housing, transportation, and more. Child care assistance. For working families, this is essential. It helps cover the cost of daycare or after-school care so parents can work while providing stability at home. Support for extraordinary medical needs. If a child has specific health challenges, subsidies can cover additional treatments, therapies, or equipment that go beyond typical healthcare coverage. That's just the beginning. Children adopted from foster care in many states are also eligible for college tuition waivers, which can make a huge difference for teens approaching adulthood. In Kentucky, for example, adopted children may attend state colleges and universities tuition-free, provided they meet certain criteria. There is also health coverage through Medicaid, which helps reduce barriers to care and ensures children continue receiving medical support even after adoption. Now, here's a detail that's often misunderstood. Subsidies don't end at adoption day. In most cases, they continue until the child turns 18. And in some cases, they extend until age 21 as long as the child meets certain education or employment conditions, especially if the adoption was finalized after age 16. This continuity of support is critical. Parenting a child who's experienced trauma or neglect takes additional emotional and financial energy. Adoption subsidies ensure families are not left to navigate these challenges alone. And remember, these supports aren't about getting paid to parent. They're about leveling the playing field for families who are opening their homes to children who've had a harder start in life. If you're working with prospective adoptive parents, be sure to guide them through their eligibility. Help them apply, and remind them, accepting support is not a sign of weakness. It's a resource, one that exists to help their child thrive.
Let's take a closer look at who qualifies for an adoption subsidy. While every adoption story is unique, the common thread among children eligible for subsidies is that they've experienced or are at risk for special needs that require additional support. This doesn't always mean a medical diagnosis. It includes a broad range of physical, emotional, behavioral, and situational challenges that can make parenting more complex. Here are the criteria. First, physical or mental disability. Children who have been diagnosed with a condition that requires ongoing treatment, specialized care, or support services fall under this category. This may include children who need occupational therapy, medications, mobility equipment, or long-term developmental care. Next, emotional or behavioral disorder. Children who've experienced trauma or disruption in care may have difficulties regulating emotions, focusing in school, or navigating social interactions. These are often rooted in the child's past experiences and require specialized parenting approaches, therapy, and sometimes medication. Then, recognized risk of physical, mental, or emotional disorder. Some children don't yet have a formal diagnosis but are at significant risk due to their family history. For example, if a biological parent has a diagnosed mental illness or substance use disorder, or if the child has experienced prolonged neglect, these factors may signal a high likelihood of future support needs. Sibling group placement. When a family is adopting two or more siblings together, the child automatically qualifies for subsidy because we recognize the extra commitment and care it takes to keep brothers and sisters together. Keeping siblings intact supports emotional healing and long-term well-being. Previous adoption disruption or multiple placements. A child who has bounced between homes or experienced an adoption that didn't finalize faces additional emotional and psychological hurdles. We want these children to find permanent families, and subsidy helps encourage stability after such disruptions. Racial or ethnic minority status. Children who are part of a racial or ethnic minority group and are at least 2 years old qualify. This category recognizes the systemic barriers and placement delays that disproportionately affect children of color. It also acknowledges the importance of providing ongoing support to families committed to culturally competent care. And finally, age. Children who are 7 years or older at the time of placement qualify. Older children are often harder to place in adoptive homes, and subsidy can help remove some of the hesitation for families who are otherwise willing but worried about long-term resources. So what does this all mean in practice? It means that when a family is willing to open their heart and home to a child who may have greater needs, the system responds with support. And that support is grounded in research, compassion, and a commitment to the lifelong well-being of every adopted child.
Now that we've reviewed who qualifies for an adoption subsidy, let's break down exactly what's included in the support package. There are 3 core components of the subsidy agreement, each designed to help families meet their child's needs without financial strain. 1. Non-recurring fees. This is a one-time payment, up to $1,000 per child, that helps cover the upfront costs of adoption. It can be used for things like court filing fees, attorney fees, the guardian ad litem GAL costs, notarized documentation, or administrative services. Families may still have some out-of-pocket expenses, but this payment can significantly reduce the barrier to completing the legal process, especially for families adopting more than one child at a time. 2. Monthly maintenance. This is the heart of the subsidy program. It's an ongoing monthly payment to help meet the child's daily living needs. Think food, clothing, housing, school supplies, and personal care items. The exact amount depends on several factors, including the child's level of need and the region or state guidelines. But what's important is that this payment is not income-based, meaning it's designed to support the child's well-being regardless of the adoptive family's financial situation. Families are expected to use this money intentionally to meet the individual needs of the adopted child, not as general household income, but as a tool to support stability and growth. 3. Extraordinary medical. Children with unique medical needs often require specialized care that goes beyond what Medicaid or private insurance will cover. This part of the subsidy helps pay for assistive devices like hearing aids or mobility tools, special therapies like speech, occupational, or trauma counseling, transportation to specialized medical appointments, reimbursement for uncovered procedures or medication. This benefit can be a lifeline for adoptive parents navigating complex medical systems or managing high care costs. Let's pause here and emphasize. Adoption subsidies are not meant to pay someone to adopt. They are designed to ensure equity, so that families who are willing to adopt children with higher needs are not left carrying those costs alone. These components work together to create a sustainable path for permanency, especially for children who have already been through instability and loss. When a family is supported, a child is stabilized. And that's the ultimate goal.
Isn't this baby so cute? Oh! Let's talk about one of the most important practical supports for adoptive families, childcare reimbursement. Adopting a child, especially one with special needs or a history of trauma, requires time, energy, and emotional availability. But for many adoptive parents, staying home full-time just isn't financially possible. That's why childcare reimbursement is a crucial piece of the support network for working families. Here's how it works. Families who adopt children from foster care may be eligible for childcare assistance as long as they meet a few basic requirements. First, reimbursement is available for both full-time and part-time care, as long as the adoptive parent is working a minimum of 20 hours per week. This flexibility allows parents to work part-time, go to school, or gradually transition into full-time employment, all while ensuring that their child is in a stable, nurturing environment during the day. Next, this benefit is available for adoptive parents who are also pursuing higher education. So if you're working toward a degree, certification, or skill development that enhances your family's stability and your future employment options, you're still eligible to receive support. It's important to note that this is a reimbursement program, which means child care services are initially paid for by the adoptive parent and then reimbursed on a monthly basis. You'll need to submit receipts and documentation of hours and services in order to receive your reimbursement. It's a system that requires some organization, but it provides meaningful financial relief once you're set up. The Division of Child Care, or DCC, sets the reimbursement rates, and families are encouraged to use public preschool services or licensed providers who meet the state's standards. Using approved child care providers helps ensure that children receive high-quality care in environments that understand developmental and emotional needs. When possible, families are also encouraged to choose providers whose co-payments align with the state's regulated maximums, which helps prevent out-of-pocket costs from getting too high. And finally, I want to underscore the heart behind this policy. Child care assistance exists to support adoptive parents in maintaining employment and stability while making sure children are in safe, developmentally appropriate environments. It's not just about convenience. It's about keeping families whole and helping adoption succeed for the long term.
Now that we've covered the basic eligibility for childcare reimbursement, let's go a little deeper and talk about the additional guidelines, because while this support is generous, it's also structured with very clear boundaries. Let's start with age restrictions. Generally, childcare reimbursement is only available for children under the age of 13. However, there are exceptions, especially for children with special needs who may require supervision beyond that age. For instance, a 14-year-old child with developmental delays or behavioral challenges may still be eligible for assistance, but it must be supported by documentation. That brings us to our next point: special needs documentation. For children over 13, the state requires a formal assessment by a physician or a qualified mental health professional, QMHP. This documentation needs to clearly outline why the child cannot be left unsupervised and what their care needs are during the day. This is crucial in ensuring the support is aligned with the child's actual developmental level and safety needs. Ongoing review is another key piece of this system. Even once approved, families must resubmit documentation every 6 months. This isn't to create a burden, it's to make sure the support continues to match the family's evolving circumstances. A child's care needs might change over time, and the system is designed to adapt with them. Now, what if you're a non-working parent? Child care assistance can still be available, but it's reviewed more closely. The state understands that not every adoptive parent can work outside the home. Maybe the child's needs are too complex, or the parent is undergoing treatment or caring for other dependents. In these situations, the state will evaluate the full picture and may approve short-term assistance that's revisited every 6 months. The main takeaway here is that child care assistance is not one-size-fits-all, and that's a good thing. The policies are designed to be flexible, but also accountable, so that families get the help they need when they need it, while keeping children safe and thriving. This level of support doesn't just help families survive, it helps them stabilize, grow, and succeed in one of the most meaningful commitments a person can make: choosing to adopt and raise a child through love, healing, and hope. We now arrive at the moment that many adoptive families long for: the finalization of adoption. This legal step marks the official end of one chapter and the hopeful beginning of another. It is the culmination of a journey that is often long, sometimes complex, and always deeply emotional for the child, the caregivers, and the extended family. When an adoption is finalized, the court declares that this child is no longer in temporary placement. The child now has a forever home. They receive a new birth certificate listing their adoptive parents as the legal parents, with all of the rights and responsibilities that come with that title. From that day forward, there's no distinction between a biological parent and an adoptive parent in the eyes of the law. But adoption is about so much more than paperwork. There's a quote I love that says, "Adoption is not about finding children for families, it's about finding families for children." And that's exactly what finalization represents: a child gaining a permanent sense of belonging. It's a joyful milestone. There are smiles, tears, family gatherings, courtroom photos, and signs that say things like "Adoption Day" and "Forever Family." But there's also a deeper truth. Finalization doesn't mean the work is done. Many families still face challenges post-adoption: adjusting to new roles, helping a child feel secure, managing trauma that doesn't disappear just because the placement is permanent. That's why ongoing support remains so critical. Even when the case file is closed, the needs of the child and the family continue. From therapy and educational advocacy to financial assistance and peer support groups, post-adoption resources help families not just survive, but thrive. As professionals, caregivers, and advocates, it's important we recognize that while finalization is a powerful moment, it's not the finish line. It's the beginning of a new chapter, one that deserves as much support, empathy, and encouragement as the journey that led there.
Even as families finalize their adoptions, hundreds of children across Kentucky are still waiting for a permanent home. That's where the Kentucky Adoption Profile Exchange, or CAPE, comes in. CAPE is a statewide initiative designed to identify and connect children who are legally free for adoption with families who are ready to open their hearts and homes. Now, if you've been in child welfare for a while, you may remember this program by its former name, SNAP, or the Special Needs Adoption Program. It was first launched in 1979, and while the name has changed, the mission has stayed the same: to make sure no child remains in foster care simply because they don't have an identified adoptive home. And the need is great. At the time of this training, there are 624 children in Kentucky who are legally free for adoption, meaning parental rights have already been terminated, but these children are still waiting for a permanent family. CAPE tackles this challenge using multiple strategies. Online profiles allow families across the state and even across the country to view information about waiting children. Matching services help connect prospective adoptive parents with children whose needs align with their parenting strengths. Recruitment events, like adoption picnics and information nights, offer in-person opportunities for families to meet children and caseworkers in a relaxed, supportive environment. And CAPE collaborates with national adoption exchanges, expanding the reach beyond Kentucky's borders for families who may be looking to adopt. These tools are not about marketing children. They are about elevating visibility, reducing isolation, and giving every child a real chance to be seen and chosen. When families browse these profiles, they're not just reading about a name or a diagnosis. They're reading about a life, a child with favorite foods, hobbies, dreams, and challenges. A child who needs safety, love, and someone to say, "You belong here." So, as we work to support permanency for all youth in care, programs like CAPE remind us that every child deserves a family, and there's no such thing as too late for love. Thank you for dedicating your time and heart to learning more about foster care and adoption. The knowledge you've gained can make a lasting difference in the lives of children and families navigating some of life's most challenging moments. Your commitment to understanding and supporting these journeys is deeply appreciated and truly powerful. One more alternate layout for quotes, but this time with the avatar and vows.